Marriage is a tricky situation to be a part of. Think about it. You've now made the conscious decision to live with somebody else for the rest of your life. You've made the conscious decision to come home to the same person every day. And you've made the conscious decision to allow somebody else to have input where you used to make decisions individually. Marriage is difficult. It takes time. Marriage is also beautiful. Marriage is also fun. But that takes work. Sometimes people get married and they think so much about what people call the honeymoon phase. And to be honest with you, yes, that can exist. But also can exist for the life of your marriage. It just takes time. It takes effort. You ever been on a trip before and things didn't go as they were planned? It's the same thing about marriage. Sometimes on that honeymoon phase, you might have a bump. You might have a loss in luggage, which means you lost who you were along the way. So let's just talk about some different tips to help your marriage stay a great marriage. All right, so one, communication. Communication is very, very cliche because that's what you hear. You hear it on podcasts, you hear people in interviews talk about it, and even if you ask different couples, they'll say, hey, what's the best thing you can do? And they say, communication is key. Well, it is, but how do you communicate and what do you communicate about? I think it's important for both people to communicate their feelings. I think it's important for both people to acknowledge the fact that, hey, I may not feel how you feel, but that's okay at times. And we need to talk about it. Can you agree to disagree? It's going to be okay in those times in which you don't see each other's view. But what I ask is that you keep communicating. Communicating also involves having an open space, making the other person feel comfortable about it. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. And what I mean by that is that as you learn to communicate, you're going to have those bumps in the road where some person may say something to you and then you get upset and then you want to walk away and they're going to say something to you and it's going to set you off because it's like, why did you say it to me that way? It happens, but then that is what comes through the experience. And I hope you learn from those experiences. Communication is key. Communication is time, and communication does not make your marriage better overnight. Just because you learn how to communicate better on Tuesday does not mean you solved all your problems on Wednesday. That's not how it works. But it can work if you're willing to work for it. All right, the second thing, perspective. So let's look at perspectives. Everybody has a different perspective about what you should do. But one thing I don't want you to do in marriage is ignore the other person's perspective. If I say something and you say something, maybe we're going toward the same goal, but maybe we see it differently. So when you think about a perspective, you get into a disagreement with your spouse, and they said they've had a rough day, for instance, right? And then as soon as they say they've had a rough day, you are like, well, I don't want to hear about that. I mean, I've been guilty of that. But the perspective is maybe they just want to vent about the day. But then also the perspective is maybe that person has talked about it so much, you don't want to hear about it anymore. So what do? How do you meet in the middle? Well, you come up with this. Okay, look, it's cool. Let's just talk about this for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. That way I can listen to you and you can get it off your chest. It takes a perspective because you have to understand where each person is coming from. Maybe one person likes to go to bed early and one person likes to stay up late. But what's the perspective? Maybe the person likes to stay up late because they're so stressed they have a hard time falling asleep. But maybe the other person wants to go to bed early because they've had such a long day at work. So how do you meet in the middle? You know what? Monday through Friday, I'm going to go to bed at this time. But you know what? On Saturday, I stay up a little bit later and we can do something together. You have to figure out that common ground and remember the perspective. And the last thing, which I would say is one of the strongest foundations, right there, God has set you up for it. God has told you to have what? Patience. You have to have patience. Patience is something that if you don't have it and if you don't exercise it, then your marriage can misuse you. And this is what I mean by that. Marriage is already difficult. But imagine living in a house with someone that's getting on your nerves every single day. And then waking up, they're getting on your nerves. And then you go to work, they're getting on your nerves. And then you come back home, that person's getting on your nerves. So what happens? You become impatient. And because you're impatient, now your spouse is impatient. That energy has rubbed off on that other person. Now you have two impatient people in the house. So what happens? Friction. It happens on both sides. Patience is also very difficult because it requires you to wait for a time, and there's no limit on that time. There's no limit on how long you may have to wait on your person to accept your responses. There's no limit on how long it may take for a person to hear your side of the story. There's no limit on how long it may take for a person to understand why you do the things that you do. But you have to be patient with them, and you have to hope that they're patient with you. You have to be patient with them, and you have to hope that they're patient with you. Because if you don't, your marriage will be at such a greater risk for infidelity. Your marriage will be at such a greater risk for walking out, frivolous spending, keeping secrets, simply because you are impatient and you've become fed up with your spouse. So practice that. The same patience you want them to extend to you, try to extend that to them. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. But isn't that the beauty of things that are gorgeous? They take time to form. They take time to mold. Beauty is not created overnight. It is indeed a process. And that's exactly what marriage is. So again, if you want more marriage tips and you want marriage coaching, hit me up at harvestandcoaching.com. Obviously, please go to our social media outlets. We have Facebook, we have Instagram at Harvest and Coaching. And in addition to that, please go to YouTube. We post weekly videos on how to encourage you and how to help you become a better version of yourself. All right, I look forward to seeing you soon, and I hope this helped.